Good afternoon and good morning to those that will listen to this broadcast in its audio-only podcast form later. I'm your host, Jason Miles, here for another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. We're doing something a little different today. I couldn't get our guests scheduled at our normal live stream time, so instead of doing a pre-recorded episode, I thought, F it! Doing it live! So here we are, trying out something new. Doing something a little earlier on a Monday. If you're new to the channel, welcome. So glad to have you here with us. If you're a returning listener, subscriber, or one of our very valued patrons, hell yeah, you people are the fuel in the TIR engine that keeps this show going. Before we get started, the holidays are approaching, and what better way to tell the good people in your life you love them than with a TIR patron membership? Well, that's right. You can give a patron membership to your loved ones or that libertarian dude at your job that keeps whining about privatizing Social Security, or your crazy uncle is a sovereign citizen and goes on about how your birth certificate is a financial note. Doesn't matter, everyone wins. You don't have to wrap anything. And we have the QR code right here. Bam! Gift patron right there. Scan that QR code. It'll take you right to the screen where you can gift a Patreon membership. It's the greatest stocking stuffer. Never had stuff. Now, onto the show. Why didn't California vote to raise the minimum wage? In the recent November election, California voters surprisingly rejected Proposition 32, a measure aimed at increasing the statewide minimum wage to $18 per hour by 2025. This decision occurred despite prior legislative success, such as the passage of a bill raising fast food workers' wages to $20 per hour. The rejection of Prop 32 reflects a broader trend in voter priorities as economic concerns have overtaken issues like systemic racism, which dominated public discourse in the aftermath of the George Floyd protests in 2020. Polling data from the Associated Press at the time of the election indicated that a majority of Californians cited the economy as their primary concern, with worries about inflation and rising costs playing a significant role. Opponents of Prop 32, including the California Chamber of Commerce and other business groups, warned voters that such an increase could lead to higher prices and economic instability, a message that appears to have resonated widely. Simultaneously, growing public frustration with corporate power and wealth inequality has fueled more radical critiques. The recent assassination of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson prompted a flood of online commentary expressing disdain for the perceived exploitation by corporate elites. United Healthcare, in particular, has faced criticism for profiting at the expense of denying essential care. Despite widespread economic precarity, evidenced by the rising number of ALICE, I'm just showing that if you guys don't remember, ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed, households, and persistent issues like housing insecurity, public responses suggest a declining collective empathy for the economically vulnerable. For example, San Francisco recently announced the closure of its only RV parking site for unhoused residents, underscoring this shift. This growing tension highlights a paradox. While frustration with corporate greed is palpable, there is little evidence of a coordinated working class movement capable of enacting systemic change. The rejection of Prop 32 raises critical questions about public attitudes towards economic justice, the influence of corporate lobbying, and the potential for a renewed push for labor rights and equity in the post-George Floyd era. Here to discuss this with me is our good friend and journalist that does cover the working class. I really enjoy Alex's work. I shouldn't say enjoy. I'm informed by Alex's work on fast food workers, as I have spent the majority of my life in precarious economic situations. I think he really paints a very vivid picture for most. Please welcome, coming all the way live from my birth city Oakland, California. Please welcome Alex Bark. What's up, brother?
Hey Jason, thanks for having me back.
Thanks for coming back. I appreciate your output, your writing output. You write a lot, so that gives me more chances to book you on the show.
Cool. I appreciate you reading me. Appreciate anyone reading it. So
Wherever you guys are watching or listening, there is a link in the description to Alex's recent in Jacobin. Um, the fast food sector succeeded in securing a $20 minimum wage while broader efforts like Prop 32 failed. What unique factors, such as worker organizing or public perception, contributed to the success for fast food and then I guess the failure for Prop 32, in your opinion?
I think most important thing to recognize about these two pieces of legislation, Prop 32, which the failed one, which didn't bring us a higher minimum wage across sectors, was a ballot proposition, and the other one, legislation that was a legislation that went through our our assembly and our Senate, and it's got signed by Gavin Newsom, who can governor who can do no wrong in the eyes of liberals across America. So it's like you had kind of like, on one hand, you had a pretty kind of like technocratic process. Most people in this state, like most Americans generally, couldn't even tell you the name of their like assembly member, much less their state senator. They're kind of like operating in the dark a little bit. They can kind of, they can weigh the pros and cons. They can hear both sides, and they kind of made an assessment that said like, okay, yeah, like a higher minimum wage for fast food workers, that makes sense. That's doable. That's not gonna, that's not going to do a lot of harm to, that's not going to like kill jobs in great numbers or raise prices significantly. Um, and now that it's passed, I mean, a year after it's been on the books, it's that has shown to be the case, that it hasn't had a great like detrimental effect
Mhm.
for consumers or for workers. But that was one process, and that kind of worked. Although there's a backstory there, which we could talk about also.
Yeah.
But then, the other thing, Prop 32, that went straight to the ballot. And so going straight to the ballot, you're dealing with voters who are voting on things basically without reading kind of like the white paper that's weighing the pros and cons, or talking to the experts or any of that. Or, you're dealing with people who are like, well, you know what, that sounds like that's going to cost me more. Um, and like, I don't feel like paying more. Don't they get enough? Don't, or maybe I am a low income worker. Maybe I am a low wage worker. This is going to cost my job, something like that. And so like the kind of the discourse gets a lot more simplified and streamlined. And anytime it becomes so simplified, it's a lot easier to appeal to people for emotional reasons, and kind of like, your gut instinct says like, well, this is going to cost more than I think it's worth, so no. That said, it did fail pretty narrowly, so
Yeah,
that's
it's
something else
close.
we
It's like
we could talk
51 to 4. It was 51 something, 49 something.
about.
It was a really close vote.
Yeah, it was really close.
But did this remind you a little? I don't know if were you in the Bay for Prop 20 or 22? Was that the one?
22, yeah.
Were
Yeah,
you around for that?
yeah, yeah,
Did
right.
the discourse kind of remind you of that, where it felt like a lot of people were extremely misinformed, but it almost felt like there was a steadfast like anger in being disinformed. They did the little bit that they knew about the proposition was all they needed to know, um, and they just kind of went with it. Even hearing people say things to the extent of, you know, of course, Uber and Lyft are going to have my best interests at heart. I make money for them, and I was like, I don't think you understand how this works,
Yeah, yeah,
which is a hard conversation to have because you never want to call somebody stupid, and that's
yeah,
how a lot of times, even if you're not trying to, that's how it can come off.
yeah.
Do you feel the same thing was happening in this situation with the minimum wage hike?
I think so. I think there was a lot of, I mean, we are, whether we are in that state or not, I mean, there is this kind of general feeling of like scarcity, and and it's kind of like, certainly the Trump election encouraged that. I mean, certainly, the Trump campaign encouraged that. And I mean, there are a lot of Trump voters in California. I mean, solid blue state means like, 55% and above kind of
Uh,
voting.
what does that mean? Can I ask you something?
Yeah, yeah,
You're
yeah,
an Oakland native like myself.
yeah.
Do you see the same shift? Because and I've been saying this over and over because these have been the craziest 8 years of my 47 on this planet.
Mhm.
And 2020, 2021 felt like there was an opening, if you will. Arundhati Roy wrote this really interesting essay called Let the Pandemic Be a Portal, right? For change, right? Let us take this time to reflect and maybe we can collectively do better. We fought to get homeless people housed during the pandemic. California was the first. I think San Francisco was the first place to do that. Granted, we have a larger homeless population, but this is also a population that a lot of people don't give a shit about.
Mhm.
Um, so taking that first step kind of shocked me. And then you saw all these people talking about defunding police departments. Um, that is gone. The same people that have the signs about trans woman is a woman and human rights and all this other bullshit are the same people that want to lock up minors for property crime for long
Right.
periods of time.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that change, that rightward shift, has a lot to do with not wanting to see legislation for minimum wage?
I think there is a connection. And I think there is a palpable turn away from any kind of like what you might call kind of like a communal impulse.
Mhm.
And I think like, it is, I mean, it's at best debatable how much like politicians kind of lead public discourse and how much they just kind of follow kind of the
Mhm.
mood and tap into it. And I think certainly Trump, as much as we would like to think that he's this kind of aberration who kind of came out onto the scene and kind of like drummed up this kind of fervent like outrage against you know helping other people, right?
Yeah.
I think that was already kind of there, and he just kind of made it. He put it front and center, and he said, "No, let's like vote for that. Let's vote kind of with that in mind." Um, just kind of vote, assuming that even if your family is largely undocumented, that like they won't be affected because they're special, and that and freely like we can let's let the federal government go screw like everyone else besides your family. I mean, with these kind of like nonsensical assumptions in mind. I mean, that's kind of like embedded into kind of what you might call the Trump worldview, philosophy, whatever we want to call it. So I mean, I think that's there, and I think that's there though, even among, I mean, not just among Trump voters. I mean, I think it's around for everyone. I mean, it's totally what you're saying. I mean, what would you describe also about like, trans rights or human rights, and that same person is talking about like, just locking up homeless people or
Yeah.
kicking them off the street or something. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, that's for real. I mean, and that I associate that very much with. Um, I think something also that's been kind of going on in the Bay Area in particular, maybe, but I think maybe everywhere. But I see it in the Bay Area just kind of associated with like kind of the tech economy, where there is a lot of stuff, a lot of kind of like um, the kind of the nitty gritty of politics. A lot of it kind of exists in the abstract, and kind of like the reality of kind of civic politics of kind of like the people who live on the street, the people who work on the street, the people who serve you lunch and all of that. That is kind of like another category of that's where you're kind of like Hobbesian, every man for himself worldview just kind of like takes hold. Um, so you have this kind of like I mean the tech industry just in general, and this goes back to this kind of Prop 22 question, right? So Prop 22, I mean, the background there, right, is that like the California legislature again. This is the legislature versus the ballot, right? The legislature passed legislation that said you are going, gig gig employers, Uber, Lyft,
Hmm.
um, TaskRabbit, all the rest. I mean, they're going to, if you hire a contractor and they're working a certain number of hours per week or whatever else, they're an employee. They're not a contractor. You can't use that loophole anymore. You can't exploit that anymore. They're an employee and you owe them certain things as an employee. And then Lyft and Uber and DoorDash got together and decided that they didn't like that for themselves, their own companies. So they just wrote a new law that exempted gig companies that hired drivers specifically.
Hmm.
They just kind of drew up a carve out for themselves, and then they put it on the ballot, and then um, Californians voted on it, and that one actually passed by a pretty wide margin.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
in but so anyway, like there is just something about. I mean, there's an ethos to like kind of the tech economy, to the app economy, which it just kind of appeals to people's selfishness and their kind of individuality anyway. You're talking about like, you know, a car at your door ready to take you any damn place you want on demand, food through just the same way. I mean, it's all this kind of like everything that you could possibly want without kind of like any human interaction at all. If you don't want there to be, you can arrange all of it. You can feed yourself, you can move yourself around purely through like interacting with your phone, right? And that's kind of like it's the kind of perfection of that kind of symbiosis with technology and this kind of like separation from the rest of humanity. That is kind of what, that's the thing that the tech industry is striving for and is kind of trying to kind of lure us into. And so like when a proposition comes along that says like actually this kind of like this kind of industry that you kind of rely on that actually gets you to work, that feeds you, that feeds your family, that this industry that has trained you to be selfish, that has encouraged your selfishness, that is telling you that like the more selfish you are, like the more you'll get from us. Actually, by the way, there's a whole lot of like actual real flesh and blood people behind this thing that makes them, that makes this whole system work. And it would be really cool if we like helped them out a little bit more and treated them more fairly. That was kind of like, that was a bit of a tough sell to some people who thought like kind of the whole premise of this thing was that you didn't have to think about other people at all. And that is also, I mean, I say tech, but that is also kind of the premise that's built into the fast food industry.
Hmm.
It's just a way to kind of eat without really interacting with other people any more than you want to. They're just kind of in the kitchen in the back, and you don't have to, you don't even have to realize, that they're there, that there are any people involved. You pull up at one window, you pay, you pull up at another window, and you collect your food and you drive off, right? And so, kind of like asking people to say, okay, actually, think of them as people. That is, that you're asking them to kind of maybe do more than they're often willing to do on voting day.
So it's when you say that, it actually kind of depresses me because it makes me feel like the tech industry has won. And again, both of us, coming from the Bay Area and kind of, I'm old. I know I'm older than you, but we're both young enough to grow up when Silicon Valley was already pretty much formed. I mean, Atari had already been
Yeah,
around.
yeah,
So Apple was in existence. So we come of age where the South Bay for us
right,
is a place where all your computer stuff is made, right?
right, yeah, yeah.
Um, have they finally won? Is this kind of the end game for that kind of hippie capitalism that people marveled at? I would say in the early 2000s, like, look, there's nap pods in the Google office.
Right.
Is that what we're going to offer people? Like, we'll give you slightly more money and you'll have a nap pod. You'll never be able to organize against us because we're going to make sure that's outlawed. But look at all the freedom you have on these apps.
I I mean, I think that is the kind of question that's worth asking. I mean, put it that way. I think that is. I'm not gonna say decisively that like no, they haven't won, because I think it's a real possibility that they have. Yeah. Well, I mean, talking about Prop 22, like Prop 22. By the way, I mean, I think you're definitely right to draw the conclusion, the connection there, because there is a connection. There's a connection also to the fast food minimum wage, which, like I said, it did pass. It passed through the legislation. Um, but it like, but Prop 22 specifically, because it was like an app thing. Um, One thing that the prop, that Uber and DoorDash did, they actually sent messages to app users.
Hmm.
And they said, you pull up Uber, you're trying to order a ride because you're trying to, you're trying to get home, you're trying to get to work or something, you're trying to get to the airport, and it's like, a lot, you're kind of, maybe there's a sense of urgency, but before you actually like request a ride, a week before the election, I mean, they flashed a pop-up on your screen that said like, oh, by the way, there's this ballot initiative that's coming up, and if this thing passes, then like this ride you're about to get, it's gonna like cost more, and wouldn't that be terrible? Your driver, Juan or Farid or whoever, whatever his name is, he might not even have like, contract work or whatever the hell that we call it. Wouldn't that be bad? And now you have to like close out the pop-up before you could get your ride.
Oh
And so they
wow.
did this for like, I mean, how many customers does Uber have in DoorDash have in California?
Yeah.
They sent it to all of them. That's crazy. That's, and so whether or not, I mean, certainly they won that battle, but they won it in large part not just because they threw like tons of money at this thing, but also because they had access to people that like, the other side, such that it even exists. I mean, there is another side. There are like organized Uber drivers. There are kind of, there are, unions backing that side, but like the other side, like, they just didn't have that level of access to people.
That's an interesting point.
And they
I
did this
forgot
to
about
their drive. They sent messages to their drivers too, and also tried to, Uber tried to organize their drivers to say like, hey, this is going to put you out. This is going to put you out of work. We won't say jobs, but this will put you out of work,
that. Mhm.
and this will cut into your income. And so they could have conversations with their passengers and say, oh, this is bad and whatnot.
No, I
Um,
remember because the first bill, what Alex is talking about, before Proposition 22 comes down, there's California legislation called Assembly Bill 5, and Assembly
right.
Bill 5 kind of lays the groundwork of what's going to be Prop 22. But Assembly Bill 5 says explicitly you can't unionize, but you do have to pay these people a wage, and they are employees. Yada yada. It was basically setting the groundwork of what's an employee. What I found interesting about AB 5, I was living at Soundwave Studios at the time, music rehearsal spot in West Oakland, that so many musicians had caught like videos of people talking about how horrible it was going to be because the way it was presented to musicians was any contract work meant that you
Right.
had to pay someone's benefits. So
Right.
if you had a session player come play on your record or an engineer your record, and none of that was true at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that alone, almost every conversation I heard when that was coming out, AB 5, people were talking about that. I was like, that's not at all how that would work. That would make no sense whatsoever to
Right.
pay someone's benefits for a day's work. And contract work and gig work are extremely different. There's people that actually want to be private contractors for major tech companies. That's good money. Um, there's a difference between that person and a person that's dropping off food with DoorDash. That person wasn't a professional food dropper offer before
Right.
DoorDash came into existence.
Sure. Yeah. 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 I mean, it's the same with, I mean, both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. They were talking about how, like, if elected, they would, drop taxes on tips. And then, like, for some reason, the conversation got to be about, like, I mean, maybe not the only conversation, but it actually became like a point of discussion in some news sites about, like, whether that would affect like bankers' bonuses, as a bonus for Goldman Sachs, like trader, is that a tip? Will they not get taxed anymore? Wouldn't that be terrible? I mean, like, well, like, I mean, that never got beyond the stage of like a slogan. He
Mhm.
didn't even quite get that far. But like, I mean, it was kind of telling what the conversation around that proposal, if we can even call it that, is. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like, I mean, to say kind of the oldest cliche of this election cycle. I mean, the public is really misinformed right now.
Mhm.
I mean, like the media isn't really helping out. But even when truth is, even with the media there, I mean, it's not like it takes a public that is willing to kind of read it and to really take it seriously and to invest their trust in media. And they're not really doing that right now. There's a kind of a turn away from kind of institutions
Mhm.
and trusting kind of institutions, certainly the media, and kind of, but what was replaced it, what has guiding people's votes is their own kind of like, common sense, quote unquote, gut instinct, quote unquote, my own kind of, my, trip to the grocery store, that kind of thing. And that is informing people's decisions. So when like the prices go up or anything like, that's has happened since 2020. I mean, in kind of fits and starts and not, not as much as people kind of seem to be reacting to, but like that, like with any kind of like disruption
Mhm.
in kind of prices or kind of like convenience, that just kind of sends shockwaves through the system. So, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and USA Today and your local TV news station can put out any kind of segment or article that they want, saying from like, quoting every economist on, that there is to quote on it that says that like, well, inflation is pretty much leveled out, or like kind of like, egg prices are kind of in line with like the historic range of, X, Y, and Z. But people still kind of like, if people aren't kind of there to listen to it and take it seriously, then they kind of go with their own kind of like gut instinct. And then the thing is that like, the Ubers, the DoorDashes, and the McDonald's and the Jack in the Boxes and the Burger Kings of the world. I mean, they are, they are they see that and they are very willing to kind of manipulate those instincts and to play to those instincts and to say, low wage employers are, anytime this kind of legislation comes up, this is across the board, and this is Prop 22, Prop 32, right? They can say, this is going to, you try to help the people that we keep on our books, that's going to cost you. And without any truth behind it at all, that instinct plays well, probably played well at any time, but it plays really well now.
It does feel interesting that people are willing to listen to CEOs when it's convenient. Like
Yeah.
seeing the backlash from the death of this health United Healthcare CEO, uh, when it first happened, I was doing a show remotely in TJ and I saw a video of it on a right wing site and I wanted to check out the comments because I wanted to see how many thoughts and prayers comments there were, right? And I
Uh-huh.
was shocked that every comment was like, "Fuck this guy."
Yeah.
How many people did he kill?
Yeah.
It's kind of an across the board realization that these people can be ghouls. On that same hand, why would you then want to elect a ghoul president who works for the benefit of the ghouls?
Yeah. Yeah.
The contradiction of people, is that what it is?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's something going on with kind of like proximity. I mean, people like people hate their healthcare companies across the board, but they typically like their doctors. The doctor is the person who they see face to face, and they're like, okay, I like this guy. And it's not to say that like their healthcare company is actually good and nice, and if they just got to know their healthcare company, they would have like a better feeling for them. But like, it is easier to kind of think of like, healthcare CEO as kind of someone who exists kind of out there, and then you can kind of say whatever you want about them, alive or dead. Um, and but a doctor isn't like a doctor is a real person. He's a he or she, he's got feelings of family. You can talk about, your family with them, and that's like you have like a real kind of a connection with that person. Um, the thing is, like, something like something like Uber, and I'll say, the fast food industry, it kind of it severs a lot of those connections. So it says like, actually, you're interacting with the system, you're interacting with technology, you're interacting with like, you're interacting with a brand. Um, and so kind of, even though we might, as customers, we might understand that there are people kind of at work with those brands. And yeah, like people do have conversations with their Uber drivers, as I mentioned, and like, yeah, certainly Uber drivers, a lot of them were, they were kind of on the wrong side of this, and they were talking to their passengers about that, and that was very much to the benefit of Uber, and DoorDash and what have you. But for a lot of people, though, I mean, they don't want to talk to their driver. Their driver is just, is just a cog in the system. And so, like, in that case, it's like for those people, like the face of Uber, the kind of the human face is the guy who's on like CNBC or whatever, talking about, speaking on the driver's behalf and saying shit like, oh wow, this is gonna hurt drivers, this is gonna harm, that would be so terrible for our drivers. When no, actually it wouldn't be. That's a ridiculous thing to say, right? So there's that, and I think with Trump, I mean, there's a lot of people who voted for him. They voted for him because they in some, crazy sense, I mean, they found him relatable. They found him like this is like, this guy's real. This guy, and then they felt like they knew him personally.
They've known him
He's
since
like a
Home Alone
personal
2,
friend.
right? He's Home Alone 2.
Right, yeah.
He's been in your life since Home Alone 2.
Yeah,
For
gosh,
people
right?
our age, and, at least 50 years in the public eye has this man been.
Yeah,
So, of course, he's relatable more so than even someone like Ronald Reagan, who was a pitch man after his mediocre Hollywood career.
right.
So, Reagan to a certain degree is relatable to a voting public, but I think no one more so than Ronald Reagan in my lifetime, or Donald Trump in my lifetime.
Mhm.
The two most quote unquote relatable politicians that, again, you and I got to see in real time are Arnold Schwarzenegger as the governor of California and Donald Trump as a president of the United States. When Arnold
Yeah.
Schwarzenegger won the governorship, maybe the only thing you can do after that is Donald Trump.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you might be right there. Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, it's something that stuck with me since I think like the 2016 like primary. Was that like, someone said it's like every candidate on the stage, the Republican primary debate is saying like, the American people are angry, and Donald Trump is up there saying I'm angry, and he ran away with it for that.
Mhm.
Um, it's maybe different now, but I don't know that it's that different. I mean, people kind of like people think, when he said like, I am your anger or whatever, man. I mean, that people got that. It's like, and this is where you get into this garbage talk about how he's not a politician or something like that. He's just some guy. He could like live down the street. He could just be like some, he could just be like my uncle or something, and who says, he's always saying like, well, I could do a better job. I mean, he's that guy. He's that guy who kind of, he can see right through the system, cut through all the bullshit and just recognize it for what it is, and says like, these 10,000 people here, these federal employees, they aren't doing shit. Let's just get rid of them today. And he's kind of, that's his MO. So yeah, you have this kind of vast impersonal system that people just have a very bad opinion of generally, right? The federal government. And he's actually a relatable face to it who's going to actually go in there with real power. I mean, that's like, so that kind of like, who has like the proximate face, who has like who can speak to people and who can kind of relate to them on a
Hmm.
human level,
Hmm.
that is the person who has the power in our society today.
Well, we're all susceptible to the Mr. Smith goes to Washington kind of presentation of
Yeah, that is
oh,
very that's very apt. That's it. Yeah,
something to really be depressed about.
yeah.
Uh, uh, Switching back to food or wage legislation, how has the $20 wage legislation impacted fast food worker organizing efforts? Does it empower further unionization efforts in other sectors, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, let's talk about how we got to this $20
Yeah,
legislation.
because you
I
write
mean,
about this in your article and say that it's not all it's cracked up to be. Yay, people got more money, but there's more to that.
right. Yeah. So California was on the verge of, I mean, so okay, to take a step back, like with fast food, um, there is this thing called, franchising, where it's actually like your local McDonald's, your local KFC, not in every case, but in like, 96, 98 out of 100 cases. Like that place isn't owned by McDonald's Inc. or Yum Brands, the parent company of KFC. It's owned by a franchisee. So, just to say, it's basically a faceless business that doesn't, that they run McDonald's, they run KFC. They are not themselves McDonald's core or Yum Brands. So anyway, California, the legislature and their wisdom, they actually, I mean, through a lot of like after years of pressure from labor groups and from the 5 for 15 movement, they kind of recognized that this was a problem for labor, which is it's a built-in problem because anytime there's kind of like a labor violation, anytime like a franchisee, I mean, gets caught like stealing wages, working people more than they're supposed to be working them, denying them rest breaks, and then not paying them for the rest break. I mean, all kinds of stuff that is just illegal. They get fined for it. The franchisee though gets fined for it, and then McDonald's core, Yum Brands, they don't. They get away scot free, even though the franchisee is oftentimes they are pushing their workers to the limit and beyond the limit merely to kind of keep up with the demands of the corporation that is licensing them, the brand. So that's a loophole that's just built into the franchise system, built into fast food broadly, and it's one that the fast food corporations have exploited liberally. Um, so so anyway, so like in California, like the legislature kind of recognized this after a lot of pressure. They recognized that gap, and they moved legislation that would have actually brought serious accountability to the fast food corporations. It said that, like, okay, going forward, if there's going to be like a labor violation at a franchisee, it doesn't matter. That's like an independently owned, company. It's like, we're not buying that crap anymore. It's like the franchisees and the fast food corporation that license them, McDonald's, core, Yum Brands, they get to split the penalties 50-50. And so that was a really serious threat to the fast food corporations. And they freaked out about that. They and I mean, rightly so. That was a real threat to them. I mean, they were actually scared. They had every reason to be. Um, but so, what happened though is that once it looked like this legislation could actually pass, um, the International Franchise Association, which is, I mean, it sounds like it kind of works for these kind of small business owners, but actually it's basically just a proxy for the fast food corporations. They put a ballot, they put an initiative on the ballot that would have done what Prop 22 did, because this was a little bit after Prop 22. They saw what happened with Prop 22. They decided they would play the same game. They would take it to voters and they would bombard them with misinformation, all this crap about how, like, actually, like, if you try passing this law, that will, your local McDonald's will close. I mean, the price of the burger will go up, the line will get longer at the drive-through, all of this shit. And they got that initiative on the ballot, and then they went back to the legislature and said, okay, you want to negotiate with us now? And so the result, the compromise that we got was a $20 minimum wage for fast food workers. And we scrapped what was called joint liability that would have actually kind of brought accountability to the fast food corporations. And so the fast food corporations just totally, they won out because like not only do they not, is the legislation now say that like they can't be, they can't be held accountable. Like they're safe from any kind of labor related penalties, but also like, there's a higher wage now, but the higher wages are their franchisees' problem. The fast food corporations don't have to pay that anymore. So so yeah, when we're talking about like kind of like like where that came from, I mean, yeah, the higher fast food wage, it is, it's a higher minimum wage specifically for fast food workers. Yeah, that's a positive thing, but at the same time, like it really, I mean, it entrenched the power of the fast food corporations to the detriment, I would say, of the franchisees, which is in itself, kind of the franchisees kind of losing out is in and of itself like a positive thing, I would say. And I think it kind of though because it was such a big jump ahead, and it's now the highest fast food um, minimum wage in the country. I mean, I don't think any jurisdiction anywhere has other minimum wages specifically for the fast food sector. I mean, I think it kind of like in some ways it kind of it softened the blow from the 5 for 15 movement from fast food labor organizing. I mean, it kind of I won't say it neutered it, but it definitely I think it's harder now to, I mean, there is less, I think, going on in that area. It's kind of harder for fast food to kind of bring fast food workers together to kind of throw their weight behind a big legislative push, because this is how it went.
Is that the Amazon model then? I'll pay you the most that you can make, for this kind of work. There's a lot of people that work at Amazon. They got records, you know,
Right.
they're going to hire you regardless. And you're going to make, was it 19, $20 an hour, I think,
Yeah.
in California, which we've talked about numerous times, isn't a lot of money.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
more than
It's
you're
not.
gonna make. Well, now fast food work, maybe you can make enough money, but it's the way they've presented themselves, especially like in the South. If you're
Yeah.
making that much in the South, not to say you're rich, but that's a decent wage.
Yeah.
And you know, you're probably not going to argue that much when you're getting that aspect of what you asked for.
Yeah, yeah, it's a way to, I mean, it is like, again, like appealing to people's selfishness. I mean, it's kind of like that's sort of like, I mean, the truth is, in a few years, I mean, $20 minimum wage won't seem like, we'll seem like even less than it is now. Let me put it that way. It won't seem like a big raise.
I mean, Bernie
It'll
was
be
talking about the fight for 15 in 2016.
right.
And it's
Yeah.
like, oh, it's like, bitch, we gave you 20. Shut up. It's like, well, we get 25.
Right. No,
25. My
that
God.
yeah, that's exactly right. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics has this like nifty little like calculator on their website. You can go there and kind of look up like a county anywhere and just say like, okay, family of two, family of three, how much, like what kind of wage would you need to work, 40 hours 40 hours a week, let's say, and get by, not comfortably, but get by a
Mhm.
survivable wage. There's nowhere in California, not the most rural, most poor inland county, where $20 an hour
It
cuts it.
does not cut it. As someone that I live in Mexico right now,
Yeah,
because I was looking in the desert and there was nothing there were rooms for rent in the desert. Rooms for rent
yeah,
for what I pay for my apartment here in Mexico.
right.
It's
Yeah,
insane.
yeah, yeah, and that's I mean, like the minimum wage, Prop 32, which is the across the board minimum wage increase. I mean, that faced the steepest resistance in rural inland counties and the desert counties and in California, and yeah, I mean, you can guess a lot of the voters over there were just like, Man, this is San Francisco walking all over us all over again. They think like this might be what those people need over there. It's not what we need, and it's like no, it is what you guys need. It is what like your local like gas station attendant and you know dishwasher at the diner. I mean, it's what they need. It's in fact it's less than what they need,
Yeah.
but it's slightly closer to what they need. So.
Does this legislative victory mean what does this what does this legislative victory mean for the future of wage reform in California? Is an industry specific approach the most viable path forward?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope not. I mean, not like the thing is like when we're talking about minimum wage earners, low wage workers. I mean, they're just kind of they're very hard to organize. It's hard to get people together to kind of advocate for themselves when their lives are so precarious. And one reason is just because like they're working so many hours. I mean, I've talked to a lot of fast food workers who work 60, 70, 80 hours a week. You know, to get them to like come to a meeting after that or go to a protest or something. I mean,
Hmm.
that man, that's tough, right? So it's like there are a lot of fast food workers in California. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of thousands. Um, but like, I mean, not every industry has that kind of attention paid to it. Is that visible? Is that kind of, and it has like, you know, you can't expect like every, kind of labor unions like the SEIU to kind of like devote that much time and energy and resources to to like every low wage sector in the state because there are a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean like a higher minimum wage across the board to $18 an hour. It wasn't. I mean that would have been across the board, and it wasn't that it wasn't that ridiculous. It shouldn't have been too much to ask. It almost passed. You know, we will say that again, but it was like I mean I'd like to think it could happen in the future.
I
It
think
just
it can happen the next election
yeah
cycle. I think we're cyclical, right? We
yeah
love Bush Jr. was a straight shooter. He's
right
the kind of guy you could have a beer with. Really?
yeah
You could have a beer with a billionaire? That's weird. That owns
yeah
a baseball team?
right yeah and
Oh,
oil
man. Where
wells
do you
and
drink beer?
yeah
Sure as
right
fuck ain't the Hotsy Totsy on San Pablo.
yeah I'm sure yeah oh man that would be a strange sight yeah.
Bush at the Hotsy Totsy.
Yeah, that man, yeah,
Or
that'd
across
be
street. He'd be across street at the Mallard. Come on, let's be serious. The
yeah, yeah,
it's got the tiki torches.
right.
The backlash against figures like United Healthcare CE, the United Healthcare CEO reflects a deep-seated frustration with corporate practices. But how does this sentiment coexist with the apparent hesitance to disrupt economic systems through policies like Prop 32? Do you back to an original conversation we were having early, or original point we made early on in this conversation? It feels as if there's a lot of watching the movie Death Wish with the murder of the CEO. And right before the show started, I guess they think they found who did it. And there's a manifesto, and it, of course, is really right leaning. Um, I feel like a lot of us have Death Wish fantasies. That's why
Mhm,
we love revenge killings in this country. We love vengeance and justice is the thinnest of lines. Um, we can live out those fantasies through these lone wolf actions, but ultimately, is there a fear of upsetting the apple cart that you don't get with certain racial initiatives? So you can have the moral high ground when you're saying, nah, you probably shouldn't kill black people that don't have weapons on them for mild traffic stops. Not a good idea. We can protest to that. But this whole thing about, you know, redistributing wealth, that's kind of baked into the system in which we exist in. And I don't know how I feel about pushing back against that. Um, everything is communism in this neo Cold War post end of history moments that we're in right now. Are we as a people kind of afraid to push back?
Well, I think like I mean I'll just go back to like there's a lot of a lot of politics now is really just kind of decided through like kind of just very base emotions and a kind of a politics that's emotional doesn't have to be really consistent. And so I think you have a lot of people now who kind of say that like yeah, you who kind of want like a healthcare CEO murdered in the street. They think that's awesome. At the same time, they think like some kind of legislation policy that might kind of threaten to screw with their own, healthcare plan as much as they don't like it, that kind of freaks them out. And they don't then so they oppose that. So it's like that kind of the people who have this kind of like very like who are to the point of willing to articulate out loud that they are glad that this guy got murdered. I mean, they're maybe not like kind of if you're kind of operating at that instinct, I mean, if that's kind of like your guiding light, then I mean, are you the sort of person also who's more likely to say like something like, okay, um, like resolving like profound inequities in the labor economy and kind of delivering a livable wage and livable working conditions to the most marginalized people in our society deserves this kind of like really kind of constructive legislation that's going to upend the power structures that kind of keeps people at the margins.
Mhm.
Or are you going to say like or are you the sort of person who's just like, man, that'll make my lunch cost more, fuck that, right? So the kind of the consistent part is the outrage, and the outrage is malleable. It's the kind of thing that people with access to money and power and information sources can kind of they can twist around, they can steer it to their own ends. But like kind of are there like consistent moral principles across, you know, from place to place to place? I mean, it doesn't I don't think that's a requisite if we're talking about kind of just emotional
Mhm.
a politics of emotions.
It- healthcare was real big in 2016 and the 2020 elections, right? Because that's kind of the main thing that Bernie Sanders ran on.
Mhm.
And it infected the entire Democratic Party. Um, they probably haven't been infected about or been talking about healthcare like that since the Obama care speeches of 2008 and 2012. But
Yeah.
um, this is a little different. This isn't a glorified private system. This is a system that where everyone could benefit from it with the idea of Medicare for all. And I'm reading about possible cuts to Medicaid
Yeah.
with the new Trump administration. Healthcare was not a central part of anyone's campaign agenda. And when you look at the statistical breakdown from the AP survey they did post the California election, more people were concerned with the economy and crime than they were with healthcare, and basically no one cared about racial issues anymore.
Mm.
Um, do we need a Pied Piper to lead us to the healthcare conversation? Because California, was it 2 years ago, was going to vote, was going to put on a ballot to have socialized medicine in the state. And right before it's about to get put as a measure, um, the two or three people that were putting it up got told by the party, the Democratic Party, like, look, man, we take money from healthcare and we're not voting for this.
Right.
And if you try to do a count to see who said no, like that, you're going to fuck up the party in general. So they backed off the bill. And this is a bill that had been in the works since Jerry Brown was governor of California.
Yeah.
And Jerry Brown shot it down initially and said, you don't have a way to pay for this. So they spent, I forget how many years putting together a plan to pay for it.
Yeah.
Through a higher tax on gajillionaires.
Right.
So it was going to be able to get paid for. And California's never even got a chance to vote on it. I don't even know how many Californians knew about it, as it never was a central news talking point. You could find it in like the LA Times if you looked, or the Chronicle if you looked, but it was never a front page story.
Right.
Do we need a big political figure to carry the flag for Medicare for all? And can that figure be mainstream? Because Bernie Sanders was a fringe, independent for the longest time.
Yeah.
So he could kind of take on that role. Do you see that with an AOC type person or no?
I mean, I would like to think that I do, but like healthcare is, I hate to be that guy, but I mean, it sounds like, I guess my temptation is to say, I mean, the phrase that I want to use is kind of, it's politically complicated, but it's complicated not because of like anything inherent to healthcare itself. I mean, I mean, it's headed to kind of a crisis point as like the cost of healthcare. I mean, premiums and deductibles are just like going up faster. They're outpacing inflation. They're outpacing wages. I mean, it's just like this is kind of, we're just kind of beholden to these companies, and they kind of keep racking up the prices. It's so like it's the kind of thing that will become as much of a problem as it is now. Just for people's livelihoods, but also politically, it will become an even bigger problem politically, and certainly for people's livelihoods in a few years as the trends go. And that said, I mean, we had this kind of like messianic candidate in Obama who made healthcare like his issue, and he ran with it. And he would kind of, and he and a lot of his supporters would say that it was a total victory. When I think that's questionable, right? And so it is another one of these things where it's like you have all this kind of momentum and energy kind of readying for and then teeing up a major legislative push, and then once like the legislation actually kind of happens, and it's very compromised legislation, right? I mean, still a lot of people who are very kind of supportive of it from the beginning and supportive of the earlier iterations walk away thinking like, we've done all that we can now. We've taken this as far as we possibly can. It will go no further, and it's kind of hard to get those same people to kind of get behind it all over again, much less new people who were kind of on the fence about it before. So that the politics there gets hard. So I mean, I see a parallel to the kind of what resulted in the $20 minimum wage increase for fast food workers in that way. Is that kind of like, is that to say we shouldn't try again? I mean, like I said, I think it's going to need a real legislative fix in a drastic way, like before too long. I mean, it already does, really, but it will become kind of like, it's the kind of thing that will become kind of like, blaring headlights, obvious to all sides that this needs fixing like pretty soon, just as the trends are going like they are. But it's going to. I mean, people are there's so much disillusionment that's already kind of come with that, and that's what worries me.
I agree on the disillusionment tip. It's been about an hour. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me, Alex. I want to read some of the comments that people have left in the chat for you and I. Aunt BT says, Black George Clooney. Guess you're referring to me and my graying facial hair because I'm stressed out. I have to deal with you people. If the next biz cycle revives tech in the Bay, we lose. If it doesn't, we're facing more tech layoffs and offshoring. I think tech will become less of a factor. Do you agree with that, Alex?
Um, I mean, yeah, but like I think you know we've been through a lot of cycles of layoffs in the Bay Area. It's like has that. I mean, one thing about the tech industry and the tech workforce, it's a lot of them are very transient, and a lot of them have, not to kind of write them off as kind of like, not to say that they don't have kids and families. I mean, of course they do, but it's like, a lot of them. I mean, they came only a few years ago, and then they were only expecting to stay for so long, and then their layoff happens. The thing is, like, it is such a as kind of entrenched as the tech industry is in the Bay Area, it's also kind of ephemeral in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so if it kind of like, if they kind of shave off a big part of it, I mean, it's hard for me to say that it would be like a very obvious kind of very substantial blow. It's going to like change the face of the Bay Area, but you know, I could be
I
wrong.
mean, look, we went through the .com bubble bursting.
Yeah,
We went through the housing bubble bursting, and a
yeah,
lot of those people are still here. If we had universal health care, that guy would still be alive. So even those, quote, at the top have an incentive for these programs. And Andrew
sure.
Robles, thank you for your comment. And that guy is the United Healthcare. I don't even know his name. We can keep him nameless. I don't know his fucking name.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, like we're like yeah, and that's not wrong, and but that is like there's a complicated way that involves a lot of, you know, getting a lot of other. If you're a healthcare CEO, it involves a lot of like getting your peers on board, getting your lawyers on board, getting a lot of legislators on board, getting the likes of Fox News and MSNBC simultaneously on board, and on and on and on. On the other hand, like there's hiring 5 times as many private security guards as you already have. You know,
That seems the
that
way.
doesn't involve really anybody else, right?
That
So,
seems the
not
way they're gonna go, right? It just
yeah, I mean, I think that is, and that's not to say like not to say we should all kind of feel like deep empathy for the healthcare work or the healthcare CEOs, but like, I mean, for their kind of as they're like, oh, they're having to go through the hard, the hard work of finding a new private security firm to look after them. I mean, yeah, okay, sure. I mean that yeah, that's not like I mean that okay, whatever. But I think realistically, that is kind of where we can expect them to go.
Boss Score 777 says reminder that 70% of the country did not vote for Trump. I don't
Yeah,
know what percentage of that is voting age.
yeah.
Always
I mean
remember
that's
voting age and eligible to vote. Those numbers matter when making that claim.
yeah, but yeah,
No, a
yeah,
lot. Yeah, he's not as popularity. But to your point, Boscore, I will echo your point. This is a conversation I've had with my good friend Bert Cooper several times. Um, we have a misunderstanding of popularity in this current moment of internet atomization,
hmm
that we think someone like Donald Trump is more popular than he probably is
yeah,
because he won the popular vote, but only so many people in this country that are eligible to vote actually vote. I didn't vote. Um, so, no, I understand your point, Bosco,
yeah,
but I don't know. I don't know. I forget the number because I did look it up for something I'm writing for people that are of voting age and how many vote. And I think it's some number like 2/3 of the country that can vote doesn't. I saw they were floating Fetterman as the relatable, no nonsense Trump for the Democrats. Wow, that sucks.
yeah.
That's look at him. He's got a hoodie on and everything. Alex, why does every fast food joint in Cali have like two people working there? Falling rate of profit hitting them that hard? Besides In and Out and Chick-fil-A, to be honest. Is that
Yeah,
true?
I've noticed that too. I kind of think that, like, I mean, I've definitely been to a few fast food places around since like the higher minimum wage passed, and like it has really seemed like there's a lot fewer people working there.
Really?
That said, I mean, there was a paper recently out of the UC Berkeley Labor Center, which I wrote about
Yeah.
for Jacobin recently, that said, statistically, I mean, there's really the minimum wage has shown the increase has shown that it's been shown to have very little increase, very little change on overall employment, and actually, fast food employment has gone up, which is what you would expect. It's consistent with kind of like most, kind of just that's the kind of consensus opinion around minimum wage increases. They don't really cost jobs, despite what opponents about them say. But that said, I mean, yeah, I do kind of like it. Does seem like fast food outlets are like trying, they're getting by with less. I think a lot of that really it comes down to the franchisees. They just kind of they're annoyed that they have to pay more. They have to pay higher wages. A lot of them, even though it was the International Franchise Association that kind of led the charge against, for this higher wage, as a like I said, as a compromise to avoid some other legislation that they wanted even less. Even though it's the International Franchise Association, the
Mm.
franchisees have largely kind of said, I mean, to the degree that they're even talking to the media, which isn't a lot. I mean, they're kind of there hasn't been a lot of that, but the comments that have slipped out have mostly say that like they didn't feel like they were included in that conversation and they didn't want it. Um, Generally speaking, it's getting harder. It's getting more expensive to be a fast food franchisee, and which is why you have a lot of like labor, violations, wage theft, and that kind of thing. It's not just negligence. It is just kind of like this kind of like messed up way to like kind of cut, to cut costs in a restaurant. It's to kind of just do this kind of shady business of like not like noting when someone, not paying someone for their time, basically.
Mm.
And so I think, yeah, franchisees are some of them are going for other, I think a lot of them they are putting less people, they're putting fewer people on the clock at a given time. They're hiring fewer people. I think that's happening. That said, I'll repeat that statistically. I mean, the best studies that we have on this say that fast food employment really isn't changing in this state as a result. So hard to say.
And Boscore 777 says AOC's plan to reduce healthcare costs is hawking skincare. That's pretty funny. Thank you guys for all your comments. Thank you guys for joining me on this very special episode with Alex Park. If you guys would like to see more episodes like this, because I can get Alex when he's
I'm around.
free. Let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching this very special episode. If you do enjoy the work that is done here on TIR and have the means, feel so inclined, become a patron for as little as $2 a month or $30 for the year. You can have backstage access to champagne rooms past and present. Join us for movie nights, which we are having a movie night this Friday. Also, let us know how you feel about this situation. Why do you think the minimum wage increase was voted down? What do you think we need to do to attempt to improve working conditions for the precarious many? Let me know in the comments. Also, wherever you're watching or listening, there's a link to Alex's work, which we are fans of here at TIR. Alex, again, thank you so much. You don't know what it means to have a Bay Area native on the show. It's so very rare. I'm the only one on the fucking channel. And you're from Oakland. I know you know what hyphy dancing is, turf dancing. I know you've ridden BART.
Oh yeah.
You know when Telegraph Avenue was really cool.
Yeah. Oh man, yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for those reasons alone, you have carte blanche to come on this show for anything you're working on. You have the email, hit me up. And
Great.
I might be up in the Bay Area next week. If so, I'm going to try to look you up.
You do that. All right. I would look forward to that. Very much so.
Thank you guys for hanging out with us. And we are out.
All right. Thank you.